Crime, tough on the causes of crime. It is, of course, standard electioneering fare. You can bet your bottom dollar Barack Obama and his Republican challenger Mitt Romney will be flogging that same said dead horse slogan on the hustings sometime soon. For although the Yes We Can pledges by the president on being a change agent does seem the issue of imprisonment among young black men without college education is one of those issues that's been left to fester. Well, Bruce Weston is Professor of Sociology and he's Director of the Multidisciplinary Program in Inequality and Social Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He co-chairs a task force on the challenge of mass incarceration for the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he's been in Australia as a guest at the US Study Centre. He's appeared at a conference on why leaders can't lead. I caught up with Professor Weston just a short time ago. Bruce Weston, a warm welcome to the show. You've written of late that the US penal system has grown now beyond essentially disciplining the deviant few to imposing a systematic influence on broad patterns of social inequality.
That's right.
Is that one of those, I suppose, unintended consequences of expansion?
Yeah, I think so. If you had gone back to the early 1980s, before the system had begun to grow and policymakers knew the path they were going down, but they had no idea that it would have generated these massive prison populations 30 years later.
This is the thing, because we often look at institutional change, as you say, as if anything, a progressive influence. What fundamentally went wrong here?
I think there were two things going on. I think American politics changed. It shifted to the right after the civil rights movement, partly as a backlash to the civil rights movement, and law and order and getting tough on crime became the dominant themes in American politics. But besides this, there were also enormously deep unemployment problems among low-skilled men in American cities, and it was these men that formed the raw material for the growth in the prison populations.
What's been the response under a black president? One would have assumed this is his kith and kin here, would have been a priority for Barack Obama. Has it been shelved for second-term territory?
Well, I hope he gets to it in his second term, if there is one. The issue is utterly radioactive politically, because I think a more rational approach to criminal justice policy can be construed by political opponents as being soft on crime.
Yeah, and soft on the causes as well, because as you would identify here, what in terms of an environment is lacking? How critical is it that those education life chances are missing so often?
Oh, I think this is absolutely fundamental. Everyone who winds up in state prison has a history of school failure, has a history of discipline problems, a history in the juvenile justice system. So if we really want to get to the root of this problem, we have to look upstream at the schools and the kinds of neighbourhoods that these guys are growing up in.
The 1960s was meant to have ushered in this new dawn of thinking, the new rights and the progressive nature of that generation. Somehow the perfect recipe didn't turn out in the final baking. How so?
Well, I think those progressive movements were very focused on racial inequality and very focused also on gender inequality, actually. And so what was neglected in that whole period of political ferment and policy change was economic inequality, and it was deep problems of poverty and unemployment that wound up being decisive. And many of the problems of racial discrimination and segregation and so on were solved, actually. And I think middle-class African Americans were tremendous beneficiaries of that, but the poor were left out.
It's one of those kind of paradoxes now, though, that we're talking, if anything, in the US about static wage growth over not just one decade, but several now. How does this debate resonate when the broader mass of citizenry find themselves on the back foot?
Yeah, it's a, it's a tough argument to make in times like this, but I think the argument has to be fundamentally about public safety and what institutional environment, what social policy environment do we want that can promote a long-term, sustainable, robust public safety. And the problem with prisons, trying to incarcerate your way out of the public safety problem, is that it's very, very expensive and it winds up causing more problems in the long term than the alternatives.
By very expensive, you mean between $40,000 and $50,000 a year to keep someone locked up. Tell me about wiping the slate clean. How feasible is that? And could we have a tiered system as some sort of solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think any change is going to be incremental. It took 40 years for the system to grow. It's going to take a long time to step back from these very large prison populations. I think ultimately the solution will involve diverting a lot of people away from incarceration to some kind of community support and supervision. That's a very difficult policy discussion to have in America because there isn't much support and supervision for low-skilled men with employment problems in general, let alone those who are involved in serious crime.
If the whole setting, though, of work in the US has changed, as the very structure of what that economy offers the rest of the world has evolved, you have said work can be the platform on which a myriad of problems can be solved.
Yes.
But it's as much the quality of the work as work per se, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think you've put your finger on a very hard problem. Most of the people we're talking about have no history of legitimate employment at all, and so getting them into regular work, I think, would be a very big first step. But really, for these men to play a positive role in their communities, they need to be able to be offered a pathway of progress through their own life course, and this ultimately means skilled jobs with more education and opportunity, and that's a very tall order for this population.
How much does home ownership, or a lack thereof, that stability, that framework in this environment, further offset any gains in this space, that idea of dislocation on the outside?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is a group that is, dislocation is a good word. This is a group that's economically dislocated in so many respects. There's no wealth. They carry enormous financial obligations, partly as a consequence of their incarceration, partly because of outstanding child support obligations, frankly. Marriage rates are extremely low, and so they're disadvantaged on many, many different dimensions. Certainly there's no wealth in these communities, but fundamental things like housing stability, healthcare and so on, these are also unaddressed needs in this community.
Bruce Weston, their guest of the US Studies Centre here in Australia for that conference, and that's all we have time for this week.